welcome to another episode of Quest for Truth. I'm Douglas Hamp, my co-host Rob Skiba. We are truly on a quest for truth. We've been going through the book of Revelation. We don't have all the answers, but we might have a couple. And as we discover some amazing things in God's words, we want to share it with you, and we'll show you what we're looking at as well. So last time we got through the first part of Revelation chapter 7. We talked about who are the 144,000, quite possibly. Are they evangelists? Well, check out the episode and you can see for yourself. Now we're going to carry on in verse 9. So Revelation 7, verse 9. Hey, Rob, by the way, how are you doing, man?
I'm doing good. Looking forward to diving in. This is this part of Revelation 7 is where some people think the rapture can be. We have a lot of people who think it's, after chapter 4. After that, the church isn't mentioned, so supposedly, where John is called up, that's a picture of the rapture, and we've talked about that already. But here's another place people go to thinking it's the rapture. So this should be interesting.
Now, we've talked about the rapture. I think, in fact, after we did the first rapture show,
big dip in our numbers.
Yeah, dip in our numbers, sure. But there was a fair amount of, backlash for various reasons. Just to let people know, I was very much a staunch supporter of the pre-trib rapture, and I did not abandon it easily. I really didn't. In fact, I was actually kind of wringing my hands trying to get around some of the problems. But the biggest problem I had is I just couldn't find it in the Bible. That was my really big problem. If I could find a verse that would really support it, then I'd still be on that wagon. But I don't find a verse that supports it. We have all kinds of illusions and types and all this stuff, but that's kind of like an argument from silence, right? You can't do that. I mean, maybe you can use it as sort of a third string argument, but you can't use it for your first string. You have to have a good, solid verse, or a couple, better yet, a couple verses that really teaches that doctrine, and yet I just couldn't find them. It's not in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4. In fact, if you go to Matthew 24, you see clearly that the Lord is going to send out his angels after the tribulation of those days to gather his elect. We can argue those are just the Jewish people. Okay, fine. But at least that one is clear. Whereas this supposed rapture of the church before the tribulation, I just don't see it. And who am I going to fear, God or men? Well, I'm going to fear God, and I'm told that I'm going to receive the stricter condemnation for what I teach, according to James 3:1. So I take that very seriously, and if I cannot find a verse for it, or even a really good allusion to it, if I can't find that, and I definitely don't find the verse for it, then I'm not comfortable teaching it, and I finally had to come out and just admit it, that I just can't find it. It was a real bummer, because I tell you what, I would love to be raptured tonight. I mean, really, I'm serious. I would love to be raptured tonight. That would resolve a lot of problems. And I tell you what, I bet you a lot of people in Iraq would like to be raptured at this very moment.
Right.
Okay, people that are getting their heads cut off would like to be raptured, just moments before that actually happens. I mean, who wouldn't? I mean, this is human nature. None of us really wants to suffer. So, I'm not inviting suffering. And people say, well, what, do you want to go through the tribulation? No, of course I don't. I mean, what am I, a masochist? No, of course I don't want to go through the tribulation. That's not the argument. It's not a logical argument. It's not an emotional argument. It's a scriptural issue. Where is the verse? Okay, where is the verse? And that is my only issue with it. If you can show me the verse, I will recant. I will go back gladly. I'm telling you, I want to be in that camp. But until I can find the verse, I just can't be honest and say, well, of course it's pre-trib, because where's the verse? It's like the old commercial, where's the beef?
Where's the verse?
Where's the verse? That's my big question. And I'll tell you what, it's funny. Sometimes I get into this conversation, and people say, oh, I believe in a pre-trib. I say, well, what verse do you use to support that? And they're like, well, there's a lot. I'm like, well, which one? Just give me one. Well, I can't think of any right now. I'm like, okay, so here you have a very significant doctrine, right? and yet we can't find the verse. I mean, look, when it comes to salvation through Jesus Christ, John 3:16, right? For God
Mm-hmm.
so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish but have everlasting life. We know that one. We got a verse for it. We've got lots of verses that tell us that salvation is through Jesus Christ. There's no other name under heaven given among men by which you must be saved, right? Peter says. So we have lots of verses that support that it's through the Lord Jesus. And yet when it comes to the pre-trib rapture, quote me the verse. Quote me the verse. Nobody can quote me the verse. So that's been my issue, and that's kind of where I stand. So,
Well, I'm same thing. Please convert me back. I used to be a hardcore pre-trib guy, and in fact, back in the 90s, I had created these things called Rapture cards. The website might even still be up for all I know. Created a website called ifidisappeargohere.com and rapturecards.com, and they were these business cards, the kind that can open up, so you sit them on your desk like a little tent or whatever. On the front, it said, "If I disappear, go here.com," and on the back, or when you open it up, was all the what I thought were signs of the times, and I was heavily influenced by Hal Lindsey. I used to listen to him like crazy every night. Every time I saw him, I was listening to him. Anytime he was on TV, I was listening to him. So I had all the signs of the times I thought were happening, and on the back was a prayer, a salvation prayer. So I figured, hey, if a whole bunch of people disappear and you happen to find these cards, because I was laying them out everywhere. I put them everywhere, man. It's like, if I disappear, go here.com. And so I was hardcore. In fact, one time I was up in the way up north in Maine, on a job that I was doing up there, and we had gone canoeing and we got lost, and it got dark pretty quick, and there's a lot of rivers that fork off in many different ways, and we got lost in one of the forks, and there were caribou and bear and everything around, and we were like, oh man. And then we couldn't see anything after the sun went down, and the water started picking up speed, and we started hearing, and we were like, oh man, we're slamming in the rocks. So we skirted over to the edge as close as we could get to the shore, but there was really no place to climb out. We were afraid because there were bear and everything else out there. And then we saw one light in the distance, and we said, well, we'll try to get to that light. It turned out to be a street light at a boat launching area. So we managed to get there, and I was low guy on the totem pole. This was when I was still in the Army. And so Skiba, you stay behind and watch the gear. And they all went into town to go try to find a ride or whatever, So I'm sitting there, and, okay. But it was beautiful. I mean, there's like a zillion stars in the sky. You could see the Milky Way. Everything was there. And I'm looking up at the heavens. I'm like, wow, man, what a beautiful sight. And all of a sudden, the sky ripped open. And it was like all these Venetian blinds. They were neon green and blue and like purples and stuff. It was the Northern Lights, but I didn't know that. I didn't know that we were far enough north to see the Northern Lights, and I'd never seen them before. So when I saw that, I was convinced this was the rapture. I was like, I've studied about it. I preached about it in Sunday school. I made rapture cards, for crying out loud. The sky is opening, and this was right. This is like 90. I want to say it was 93. It was right around the time Bill Clinton, they had signed a 7-year peace treaty with Israel. I don't know if you remember that, but it was like all over the news, a 7-year treaty. And I'm going, oh man, the 7-year treaty, and wow, I mean, any second now, And the sky rips open. I'm thinking this is it, and I couldn't hear anything else because of the river, but the guys had pulled up behind me in their truck, and when the headlights shined towards me in the river, there was a fog that had settled over the top of the river. So I mean, like the sky lit up, it opened up, and all of a sudden this light came, and there was a cloud layer right in front of me, dude. I swear to you, this is the truth. I'm like, wow, I'm jumping up. I'm trying to step out on the cloud, And then one of the other guys like, Skibo, what the beep are you doing? I'm, of course, censoring it, but I'm thinking, well, shoot, I was hoping for well done, my good and faithful servant or something, And this guy comes out, Skibo, what the beep are you doing? I'm trying to step out on the cloud, So look, I believed it hardcore, taught it until about 4 years ago. And you believe me, I'd like to get back in the in crowd. It's a lot more profitable to be in that crowd than it is to be the voice crying in the wilderness saying, I don't think so. But I ran into the same problem, man. and used to have to push certain scriptures aside, pretend they don't exist, like Matthew 24:29 through 31, where he says, clear as day, after the tribulation of those days, he'll be in the clouds. Well, Paul tells us at the harpazo, we meet him in the clouds. So the only time Yeshua, Jesus, says he's going to be in the clouds is after the tribulation. And I used to have to conveniently ignore that one. But then as I started doing the Babylon Rising research and really diving into the scriptures like never before, I kept praying, I'm like, Lord, you teach me. I've got a lot of things in my head and on my whiteboard and in my brain that I've taken notes from what other people have told me. And I've been wearing the glasses that other people have given me. But help me to erase that whiteboard. Help me to take these glasses off, and you teach me, because I want to learn from you. And that's where everything changed. And look, I went out kicking and screaming too. So I mean, we both gave a little bit of our background there. If you guys have a verse that you can just hardcore, solid verse, please convert me back. Okay, I'm going to issue you a challenge right here on Quest4Truth. Convert me.
Maybe you should have a new website. I want to go back, you know. Or something.
I want take me back to the pre-tribrapture.com or whatever, man. But I don't see it. Moved off that page, and look, I'm on a quest for truth. I don't claim to have a corner of truth. I know you don't either. But this is where we're at right now. But this right here, this passage in chapter 7 is one of the go-to places that people will try to point to, saying that this is a rapture. So let's talk about it. Revelation chapter 7, beginning of verse 9. We read it already in the previous chapter episode, but let's do it again.
We'll do it again. After these things they looked, and behold, a great multitude which no one could number, of all nations, tribes, peoples, and tongues, standing before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed with white robes, with palm branches in their hands, and crying out with a loud voice, saying, Salvation belongs to our God, who sits on the throne, and to the Lamb. And the angels stood around the throne of the elders and 4 living creatures, and fell on their faces before the throne and worshipped God, saying, Amen, blessing and glory and wisdom and thanksgiving and honor and power and might be to our God forever and ever. Then one of the elders answered, saying to me, Who are these arrayed in white robes, and where did they come from? And these, of course, have come out of the Great Tribulation, he says. So, yeah, I mean, we have, we do have some questions here. This to me sounds like, okay, it says, first of all, we have the Greek words metatauta, okay, which, means after these things. There's no big, great mystery. But what that is really telling us is that, okay, cut, now we're on to a new segment. We're not...
Or a new monitor.
A new monitor. Yeah, exactly. A new monitor. Yeah, it's like, okay, put that monitor aside, come look at this one, right? So after all those things, then I saw this other thing, right? So there's a real break in there. Just like it's the same break that you have between the 7 churches in chapters 2 and 3, and then after these things, I saw a door standing open in heaven, right? That the same thing in there is metatauta. Now, in both places, those are used as a pre-trib verse. I frankly don't see it. I mean, show me, where is the rapture here? I just don't see it. But again, part of it has to do with, if you think that the book of Revelation is written chronologically, then you have to sort of make this happen. Let me just reiterate for people. I want to go back very quickly to chapter 6, looking at verse 14. I hope this will convince people.
Yeah.
Right. It says, Then the sky receded as a scroll. I mean, what in the world does that mean?
Northern Lights.
Exactly. I mean, this is no minor incident. This is it. This is it. The heavens, the sky. Here, uranos is the Greek word. This is it. This is the veil between heaven and earth. This is what Peter says, the day of the Lord will come as a thief in the night, in which the heavens will pass away with great noise. This is the big event. And so here it's happening in Revelation chapter 6. That's because we've come to the very, very end of the tribulation, and that's why you have the kings of the earth, the great men, the rich men, the commanders, the mighty men, every slave and every free man. Look, these are all the tough guys of planet Earth. These are all the head honchos, the big cheeses, the big kahunas, etc. it says that they hid themselves in the caves and in the rocks of the mountains, and said to the mountains and rocks, fall on us and hide us from the face of him who sits on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. Look at, they are now believers. They understand who's in control. And what do they say? For the great day of his wrath has come, and who is able to stand? So Revelation 6, we've come up to the very end of the tribulation. We've come to the second coming of Jesus. That's it. You could actually close the book right here and it'd be a pretty decent ending. But because there's just so many more angles that you have to put into this different thing, there's more camera angles, if you will, then really the story has to go on, because obviously you would have a sufficient story, but there would be a lot of holes in that story, even though it would be, the full gambit, but you wouldn't get the detail that obviously the Lord wants us to have. So that's why we're going on. So here, after these things, so now we're seeing a new monitor, we're seeing just a whole different scene, a whole different vision in which things are going to take place. And so I think we can very well argue that this is now a post-tribulation scene that's happening. For one thing, it says that they're standing before the throne and before the Lamb. So, right there we have God and the Lamb, or Jesus and the Father are together. So we do see that in Revelation and 4 as well. But when we get to verse 17, it says, for the Lamb who is in the midst of the throne will shepherd them and lead them to living fountains of waters, and God will wipe away every tear from their eyes. Well, where do we see that? We see it in Revelation 21:4. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and death will not exist anymore. We also have in Isaiah 25:8, says he will swallow up death permanently. The Lord will wipe away the tears from every face and remove his people's disgrace from all the earth. So, this is at the very least, it's kind of a looking ahead of what's going to happen, because it's not written chronologically. I think that is just really the issue that's going on here.
Yeah, I'm glad you went back to look at Revelation 6 again. We talked about that at some length a few episodes back. Yeah, clearly that's the end. How many times do the mountains and islands move? That's the end there. But I want to go back to Revelation 6, 9 through 11, talking about the souls under the altar. I watched a Torah commentary a couple days ago that Jim Staley did, and he was talking about how the altar of God, earthly altars, had to be made with living stones, not cut stones. You couldn't use bricks and formed stones. You had to use natural stones. And then of course Paul, Peter, in the New Testament, we are called living stones. And so I thought about that, based on what this guy was saying, and that seems to make even more sense to me. Then rather than like a container under the altar, it says in verse 9, he opened the fifth seal, and I saw under the altar the souls of those who had been slain for the word of God and for the testimony which they held. And they cried with a loud voice, how long, O Lord, holy and true, until you judge and avenge our blood on those who dwell on the earth? What if you have the altar where you lay stuff, but underneath that are the living stones that are the believers, that comprise the base, if you will, of the altar? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, I like that.
Yeah, and so I'm thinking about that, and then going to Revelation 7, you got those who are coming out of the Great Tribulation. Now, some people will look at that and say that these, when it says coming out of the Great Tribulation, these are those who are being spared from the Great Tribulation. But I look at it as saying those who are either going through it or coming out of it as a result of martyrdom. Because a lot of people are going to get their heads cut off and stuff in the tribulation period. And so, and if we think of Great Tribulation, those who subscribe to the 7 Year Tribulation Period, as I do, and I think you do as well, They usually refer to it as the tribulation, the 70th week of Daniel, but the last 42 months are the Great Tribulation. So even in that regard, even in the old pre-trib dispensation model, they had, I've read the dispensation truth, Clarence Larkin and all that stuff will refer to the last 3.5 years as Great Tribulation. So I don't even see that as an argument. Even in the pre-trib side, it looks like a mid-trib argument. If they're being spared from the Great Tribulation, then it looks like a mid-trib argument. But I see it as those who are coming out of it, as in probably being martyred. Going back to that Revelation 6. How long? Well, until the fullness. It says right there, verse 11. Then how long? Okay, verse 11. Then a white robe was given to each of them, and we just read that in verse 7 or chapter 7 also. And it was said to them that they should rest a little while longer until both the number of their fellow servants and their brethren who would be killed as they were was completed. So that seems to be. I mean, I would parallel these. Again, not going linear, but making it non-linear.
They're overlays, is what they are.
It's an overlay. It's he's looking at a monitor that's showing us another angle, another camera angle, if you will, of the same thing that we're looking at with the discussion regarding the people under the altar. Because it says right here, that they have come out of washed their robes, and they're made white in the blood of the Lamb. So I mean, you got a lot of parallels there, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think when we see, the thing is, when we don't have to hold hard and fast to the timing of the rapture, then we're at liberty to look at so many of these other questions that we have, and really by overlaying chapters 6 and 7, specifically in this case, the fifth seal, with these others, I think the more important thing, instead of looking for the time markers, is to look for the anchors where you have the same kind of language. Usually the exact same words, and when you find that, then you're gonna say, okay, these are parallel thoughts. And so what you just pointed out, that a white robe was given to each of them, and they're told to wait. And of course, we see that they died as a result of being in the tribulation. And so, this whole notion of coming out of the tribulation, it certainly does not in any way have to entail a rescue.
Spared from,
okay. Right. These are people that have gone through it, basically, and so that's what it's bringing to us, is that these are people that have actually gone through it. Who are these? They washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. That is not necessarily somebody who's been raptured and hasn't had to suffer at all. In fact, the whole idea of a martyr, I mean, this is, being a martyr is a great way to wash your robes, right? You've actually proven who you are, and because they suffered in this life, neither shall they hunger anymore, nor thirst anymore. The sun shall not strike them, nor any heat. Right. So there's no more tough times for these people. It's all good from here on out.
Yeah, the last part of it, and God will wipe away every tear from their eyes. So they've obviously gone through some suffering. Now others might say, well, maybe it's tears of joy. Yay, we got raptured. But I don't, especially if this is an overlay, and I like what you said, because I do the same thing. I'm looking for parallel phrases. When the same exact terminology is being used, I say, well, that looks like a fit to me. If I'm putting a puzzle piece together, I mean, that looks like it's fitting together pretty good. And the fact that he's wiping away every tear from their eyes and basically saying they're not going to hunger anymore, so that's a hardship right there. They're not going to thirst, that's a hardship right there. The heat of the sun, we've talked about it earlier in some of the other broadcasts, that temperature and environmental things are going to happen to the earth. It makes a lot more sense to me that these are people who are coming out in the sense of probably either being in the process of martyrdom through the tribulation, or we're talking about the very end, and whoever's left is coming out of it.
And the other thing is you have in Revelation 3:12, Jesus himself says, "He who overcomes, I will
Yeah.
make him a pillar in the temple of my God, and he shall go out no more. I will write on him the name of my God and the name of the city of my God, the new Jerusalem, which comes down out of heaven from my God, and I will write on him my new name."
Hmm.
So, it's not at all talking about uh, being raptured. I mean, look, we believe that there's a rapture at some point, but it doesn't, again, where does it say that there's a rapture? I mean, do you remember the arguments that they would bring up to say that there's a rapture in there, just simply because you have these people that have come out of the tribulation and now here they are, and this is also based on the idea that the book of Revelation is a chronological book?
Yeah, no, I mean, same, and it's always the arguments of, well, look, Noah or Lot, and I'm like, yeah, but neither one of those guys left the planet.
Right.
And then I have to tell them, wait a minute, who leaves first, the wheat or the tares? Well, if you've read your Bible, you know the tares go first. So if there's a pre-trib rapture, then it's a counterfeit rapture, and bad guys are going first. I don't see it. I don't see, and worst of all, in Matthew 24, and we've talked about it before, but the disciples asked Jesus, "What are the signs of your second coming?" And that would be a really big sign to mention, even if you're a dispensationalist. Hey, all of my followers, when you see millions of people leaving the earth, but the Jews are left behind, you guys are going to know the next 7 years are not going to be pleasant. But he doesn't say that. The most massively huge sign that you could mention for the end times would be a pre-trib rapture. I mean, come on, really? We've always had wars, rumors of wars, and pestilence and earthquakes. But a whole bunch of people flying up in the sky, I can't recall any time that's ever happened. So that would be like a really big,
That's like a mega sign,
that's
that's
a
a mega sign.
mega sign.
Yeah.
But it isn't there. And so all this other stuff becomes anecdotal, and there are a lot of interesting stories that people tell, but I found them wanting, like the Noah or the Lot, or any number of them that they use. I'm like, none of these guys left the planet. They went into earthbound places of safety, which I do maintain. I believe that there is a Goshen-like experience for the wise virgins of Matthew 25. They go in, not up. It says they go in with him, and he closes the door. And so I believe that, and especially if it's a parallel to the book of Exodus. If the tribulation period is an amped-up repeat of Exodus, nobody left the planet. But the Israelites did experience 3 of the 10 plagues. But for the rest of them, they were in an earthbound place of safety called Goshen, just like Lot was escorted to Zoar, the little town there. He was spared when the judgment of God came down on all of Egypt. And it's like everybody's in darkness, but the Israelites have light on over there. Their herds aren't getting, messed up, and nobody's getting the plagues and all that stuff. And so I do believe that there is a protection for the wise virgins, and that's a disturbing story in and of itself, because if the virgins are symbolic of believers, as I tend to believe that they are, they're pure. The only people on this planet that fit that are those who are washed in the blood. We have, though our sins be as scarlet, they are made white as snow. We are pure through the righteousness of Christ, and we're the only ones that have any concern for the return of the bridegroom. I mean, we're the only ones looking for the bridegroom. So I believe all 10 are believers, but you only got 5 of them going in, and the other ones are left out weeping and gnashing of teeth and stuff. So, I believe that there's protection for those who are wise, and if you do a keyword search on that, it's always those who obey God and keep the commandments. The fear of God is the beginning of wisdom, whereas disobedience is likened unto foolishness repeatedly. And I mean, that's just common sense. So, that goes back to what we kind of concluded with. We're talking about Revelation chapter 14 in the last show, where it talks about, here's the patience of the saints, right? Those that keep the commandments and the testimony of Christ. So I don't know where I was going with all that. I kind of got on a rabbit trail, but the point is, I don't see a pre-trib rapture in there anywhere.
Yeah. And again, if somebody's out there wants to give us the verse, otherwise, please, we would love to go back. It's a nicer thought that we'll be zapped out of here tonight. But hey, if the Bible is silent, then what right do we have to talk about it? So, again, these people, they're clearly, I mean, it tells you from all nations, tribes, peoples, and tongues. So this is mankind. Okay, this is a good selection from everybody is there, and you can't number it. I mean, these are people that are dying by the millions, apparently. And I would say they're dying. I don't think that they're being raptured. I mean, that right there, if we're just talking about a rapture, well, how many people would actually be raptured? It's hard to say. How many, actually born again Christians we have out there? That's a tricky question in itself. But this is a huge multitude. No one can number of all the tribes are before the Lord, clothed with white robes with palm branches in their hands. Now that's interesting, isn't it?
Hmm.
They're acknowledging Jesus as the King, because that's exactly what the Jewish people were doing there on Palm Sunday, as it's called, which is, of course, we know it's really the wrong feast, right? That you're supposed to have the palm branches for the Feast of Tabernacles, and yet here, or back when Jesus came in his triumphal entry, he, they were welcoming him as their king right then and there. Well, here Jesus is clearly being exonerated as the king, and that's pretty cool, of course. And they're acknowledging who God is, that salvation belongs to Him. You've got the elders and the living creatures; they're all falling on their faces, giving glory to God. And then the question, who are these? Well, again, neither of us sees the rapture. Maybe someone out there does. Send us the verse. We'd be happy to recant. But until then, I'm going to go that this is not talking about the rapture, but these are actually people that have died, and now they are, now they're being actually comforted. So, in fact, if you go to Psalm 121, verse 6, we also see that this is being used for someone who has well, basically, it's talking about Israel, first of all. I mean, I don't want to ignore Israel, but it's also the fact that, that people that suffer, now they're actually being made to, they're being comforted. The sun shall not strike you by day, nor the moon by night. The Lord shall preserve you from all evil. He shall preserve your soul. The Lord shall preserve your going out and your coming in from this time forth and even forevermore. So looking at the places where that phrase is used, doesn't give us any indication of you get out scot-free, but from this time on and forever, there will be no more challenges, and so you're good to go from here on out. That really seems to be the case. But these people were faithful to the end. They did not capitulate. They did not deny Jesus' name, etc. So,
Well, what if we do another overlay on this? Let me just check something real quick here. Um, yeah, okay. What if we overlaid Revelation 20 with this? Because in chapter 7, verse 15, therefore they are before the throne of God and serve Him day and night in His temple, and He who sits on the throne will dwell among them. And looking at Revelation 20, we see, and I saw, verse 4, and I saw thrones, and they that sat on them, and judgment was committed to them. And then I saw the souls of those who had been beheaded for their witness to Jesus and for the word of God, who had not worshipped the beast or his image, and who had not received his mark on their foreheads or on their hands. And they lived and reigned with Christ for 1,000 years. But the rest of the dead did not live again until 1,000 years was finished. This is the first resurrection. Blessed and holy is he who is part of the first resurrection. Over such the second death has no power, but they shall be priests of God and of Christ, and shall reign with him 1,000 years. I see a total overlay right there of them. I mean, this is talking about those who've been beheaded for their witness. They didn't take the mark, and we just saw that the difference between taking the mark of the beast versus those who receive the mark of God, and they're reigning and they're serving in
you
the
know,
first resurrection.
I like that, because now we have a threefold witness of Revelation chapter 6 and the sixth, or the
Yeah,
fifth
the
seal,
fifth
excuse
seal.
me, the fifth seal. Now we have a threefold witness. We have it there in chapter 7, and then we have it again in Revelation chapter 20. verse 4. So, yeah, that makes a lot more sense because God is always going to give
2 to 3 witnesses.
2 or 3 witnesses. 2 is the minimum, but 3 is much more common, so that he wants to verify his word. That's just a very good hermeneutic principle, a principle of interpretation called hermeneutics, that if you can't find another supporting verse that says practically, if not identically, the same thing, it's probably a pretty weak doctrine, and I wouldn't put much stock in it. Like the whole thing that the Mormons do with being baptized for the dead. I mean, where else do you see that idea anywhere? You don't see it anywhere. And of course, they're missing the mark, because that whole thing has to do with simply preparing a dead body for burial, which they used to do, right? I mean, they used to wash the body, they would prepare the body. But Paul's like, why are you doing that if there's no resurrection? Why are you wasting your time? Just cast them out and be done. But they very carefully took care of the body, washed it, prepared it, and so forth. So that's a different issue. So here we have,
and like taking Genesis 6:4 and applying a whole idea of multiple incursions on one little phrase in one sentence. That's crazy, man. Yeah.
we have to have another debate on that one someday, 'cause I still think you're wrong. I still think you're wrong.
Okay, to use your own words, give me a confirming witness. Please give me a confirming witness.
Let's do it another day. We're having so much fun over here.
I'm just in agreement with you, brother.
I know.
Hey, I need 2 to 3 witnesses, man.
Well, I think we.
Okay, moving on.
Yes, moving on. So anyway, I think that I think this is a very strong witness that we have right here. So
seems like it.
Yeah, it seems like it. Well, hey, let's move on to chapter 8. We got a few more minutes.
Cool.
Again, no chapter breaks, right? No chapter breaks in the original. I point that out. Not that it should be obvious, but we forget. I forget, and I tend to categorize everything according to the chapters, like everybody else does. It's just it's human nature, because that's how I read my books. That when I read a book and they're divided into chapters, I'm like, oh. But in this case, the chapters were added much, much, much later, and so they were not part of the originals. And sometimes, if we forget that, it can kind of skew our interpretation. I point that out because in Revelation chapter 8, verse 1, it says, when he opened the 7th seal, there was silence in heaven for about half an hour. So we really, the seal is the ketubah. It is the marriage contract that was enacted at the time of the cross. That was the time that you made the down payment. You paid the blood price or the bride price for your bride, and then a season went until you went actually to claim your bride. In this case, the bride is not the church. The bride is not the church. The bride is Jerusalem. Go to Hosea chapter 2, verse 19. I will betroth you again to myself. Well, it doesn't say again. I will betroth you to myself. But, he divorces her. He betroths her. Okay, so it's again, basically. And when did he first betroth Israel to himself? Now, again, by Jerusalem, Israel, we're talking about not only the city, the structure, but also the people, of course. Well, the first one was at Sinai, and the second one, where he is going to marry the city, is the New Jerusalem, which we see so clearly in Revelation 21.
Yeah, so, that can't be any more clear to me. I mean, you and I, people who consider themselves Christians will refer to themselves as the bride of Christ. I mean, we all say that. Well, it tells you point blank who the bride of the Lamb, who is Christ, is in Revelation 21. It's New Jerusalem, and it's defined by the 12 tribes of Israel. So to me, I'm like, that is the slam dunk against dispensation theology right there, and the explanation for Romans chapter 11 and Ephesians 2 regarding the adoption grafting process. The church, as you rightly pointed out, the bride is Israel, as defined in the New Jerusalem.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the gates going into this city are named
12 gates.
12 tribes, right?
There's not a 13th one called the church.
Yeah, in fact, when he gives a description of the bride, he should say, well, she has beautiful eyes and she has long golden hair or something like that. No, he says she's got wonderful walls and she has, these pinnacles and gems and it's like, well, it sounds like a city. Yeah, because it's a city. That's what he's describing. It's a city. The Lord is going to marry a city. He says it so clearly in
Yeah,
Isaiah 62,
and
verse
Revelation
5.
21.
It says, it says, "For as a young man marries a virgin, so shall your sons." Who is you or your? It's feminine singular. It's talking about Jerusalem. He says in verse 6, "I have set watchmen on your walls, O Jerusalem." All right? So we're talking about Jerusalem. "For as a young man marries a virgin, so shall your sons marry you." So that means that the sons of Jerusalem are going to marry Jerusalem. "And as the bridegroom rejoices over the bride, so shall your God rejoice over you." All right? So God is going to rejoice. He's the bridegroom, Jesus, the Father, whatever. He's going to rejoice over the bride, that is the New Jerusalem. And we, who are the sons of this city, we are the inhabitants of the city, are going to marry the city so that we do, in fact, become one with the bride, but we are not exclusively the bride. I mean, it's a huge, huge difference. You kind of get to the same general destination, but by a very different road, and that makes all the difference, right? The road less traveled made all the difference, right? Who said that? I can't think of the poet's name at the moment, but it'll come to me later. Emerson, I think it was Emerson. But nevertheless, digressing. So here we have, your sons shall marry you, and God, the bridegroom, rejoices over the bride. So it's very important. You see, what happens is we come into, let's say, the book of Revelation, and we already have our pre-established doctrines and dogmas, and then we filter these things in. These are the definitions. We plug these definitions in to the words we see, and then suddenly we're way over here, and we're like, well, how did that happen? Or we may not even realize we're way over there. It's because we have these definitions that are skewed. They're not based on the word, but they're based on somebody's ideas, and then we run with that, and we say, well, that is true, and so therefore we get to this very different place. And I think it's rather unfortunate, to say the least. But hey, none of us is perfect. We've all been there. We're all seeking, trying to figure it out what it is. So anyway, verse 1: "When he opened the seventh seal, there was silence in heaven for about half an hour." Wow, this is a monumental event, right? We've now opened all the seven seals, because guess what happens when you open the seventh seal? Now you can open the contract. Before that, you cannot open it. It's still sealed, right? After you open the first, second, third seals, it's still sealed. You open the fourth, fifth, and sixth sealed, it is still sealed. You cannot open it until all seven seals are broken. Then you can open it and pronounce whatever it is that is in there. Then you can actually pronounce that. So, I would suggest that we get to that pronouncement in chapter 11, where it says, after the seventh angel sounds, it says, "The kingdoms of this world have become the kingdoms of our Lord and of his Christ, and he shall reign forever and ever." So I think this is the pronouncement that we have, is in chapter 11. That's it. It's pretty much over at that point.
Yeah. Um, um, Seventh seal. I almost wanted to just jump right into the first trumpet, but yeah, I agree with you. I can't really. There's not much I could add to that.
Okay. Well, I
So,
thought it was important that we should finish the seven seals, because
yeah, for sure.
the traditional understanding is when we get to the seventh seal, then that unlocks
Right. Yeah.
all
Sure.
the other, the seven trumpets and the seven vials. But I don't see that at all. I see that we've now completed everything. There's silence in heaven for half an hour, and now John is on to something new. Now he's on, "And I saw the seven angels who stand before God." So now we're on to a new vision, if you will, a new event. Now, in his seeing of all this stuff, it perhaps follows chronologically that he now sees that's the next thing he sees. But that's not necessarily the next thing that's going to happen.
Yeah, I love the visual of a scroll that has 7 seals, and you can't even open it until you've broken all 7 of them. So the narrative up to this point has been that process of him, getting progressive revelation as another seal is being pulled, and but then it's like, okay, now we've opened up the seal, we've talked about that, I've shown you some stuff, and then it's like, oh, and then I see 7 angels who have, it's like, okay, now we're kind of, okay, now we're back at the beginning, because I actually see the first trumpet is kicking off the 7 years.
Okay. Well, let's jump into that. Let's go on. And I
Okay.
saw the 7 angels who stand before God, and to them were given 7 trumpets. Then another angel, having a golden censer, came and stood at the altar. He was given much incense, that he should offer it with the prayers of all the saints upon the golden altar which was before the throne. And the smoke of the incense and the prayers of the saints ascended before God from the angel's hand. Then the angel took the censer, filled it with fire from the altar, and threw it to the earth. And there were noises, thunderings, lightnings, and an earthquake. So the 7 angels who had the 7 trumpets prepared themselves to sound. Oh boy, this is pretty exciting.
Well, yeah, you got your prayer bomb there.
Yeah, isn't that cool? I love that.
Yeah, yeah, and I had a friend of mine who's like a Microsoft Excel guru, and based on the day with the Lord is 1,000 years and 1,000 years is a day, I asked him to create a spreadsheet that would tell me how long half hour in God time would be. It was 21 years. So I thought, that's interesting.
That is interesting.
Especially considering my belief on the 20-year time period of Jacob's trouble.
We'll see. I mean,
I don't know. But
if we're here in 33, then you might be right.
Yeah, like I said, I'd be glad to be wrong. In the meantime, I will occupy till he comes, whenever that may be.
Yeah.
But okay, if we go to the prayer bomb's going down, there's great earthquakes and everything. We have in verse 7, the first angel sounded, and hail and fire followed, mingled with blood, and they were thrown to the earth, and a third of the trees were burned up, and all the green grass was burned up. The reason, and we'll probably have to end this episode with that, with this, but the reason I think this begins the tribulation period is, again, I'm looking for the overlays, right? And if we go to Ezekiel 38, where you have the Gog-Magog war thing going on, and it talks about verse 22, and I will bring him to judgment with pestilence and bloodshed. I will rain down on him, on his troops, and on the many peoples who are with him, flooding rain, great hailstones of fire and brimstone. Thus I will magnify myself and sanctify myself, and I will be known in the eyes of many nations. Then they shall know that I am the Lord. So we got hailstones coming down mixed with blood, right? In the first trumpet, it says right there, followed hail and fire followed, mingled with blood. So I've got some very similar statements being made there. But then if you go to Ezekiel chapter 39, in verse 9, it says, then those who dwell in the cities of Israel will go out and set on fire and burn the weapons, both the shields and bucklers and bows and arrows and javelins and spears, and they will make fires with them for 7 years. So I'm like, after this aftermath, where the Gog and Magog is destroyed by fiery hailstones, it takes 7 years to clean up the mess. Is that just a coincidence? I don't know. I don't think so. That's why I think the first trumpet actually kicks off the 7 years.
I think you may be onto something. I don't have a dogmatic position on where the first trumpet falls within the 7-year period, but I think again, I love the principle that you're taking the language, you're matching it up with something else, right? It can't just be one word. It's kind of like what I call a biblical triangulation.
Yeah.
Just like when you have a cell phone, if there's only one tower next to you, you can't triangulate your position. But if there are 2, you can probably do it. But 3, really, you can triangulate, hence the word triangulate, your position. In other words, your phone can measure the distance between all of the 3 towers, and it can then discover where it is. So even if you don't have GPS, this is before the days of GPS, your phone still knows where it is, or they know where you are, based on the triangulation of your phone between any three towers. And so we can do the same thing if we have, if we have at least 2 bits, right? So here in this case, we have hailstone and fire. Using those, great hailstones, fire, brimstone. We're looking at these words, and we find those same words, as you pointed out, in Revelation chapter 8. And so therefore we can do a triangulation based on those words. And that may be, in Hebrew it's called a remez. A remez is just a hint. It's just a clue filling you in as to what you should be looking for. And that's a very important principle, because rather than having to spell out everything that has already been stated, you just give a little bit of it so that you can go back and look it up. It's kind of like a footnote. It's like, see footnote number 2, and it will give you all the pertinent details for that section right there. So, I don't know that you're right. I mean, maybe nobody knows if you're right, but I think you've come up with a pretty plausible scenario. Of course, there's a lot of debate as to where the Ezekiel 38 and 39 war will actually fall. Up until this point, I've been rather persuaded that it's going to happen before the tribulation, but I'm not dogmatic about that. That's a hunch that I've been working on, just based on my study, based on the language, based on various aspects. But I could see how it could be. You're kind of saying the same thing, that this is, the Ezekiel 38-39 war is going to happen right there at the beginning of the, or let's say just before the 7-year period. That's a pretty likely scenario. And then out of the aftermath of that, this Antichrist is going to rise up and say, hey, I've got a solution so that we'll never have this again. In fact, I think Ezekiel 38 and 39 will be viewed by the world as World War III. They will call it Armageddon. They'll say that was it. That was the big thing. That was the worst that could ever happen. Just like World War II, it could never get worse. But this is the long-awaited, long-expected World War III. And they'll say, whew, we're glad we have that behind us. Now we can get on to world peace. So, you may be onto something, but,
Yeah, I mean, it's the 7-year reference in verse 9 that really catches my attention. I mean, because I've bounced back and forth on it as well. I mean, could it be later or during the tribulation or even after the tribulation? But being after the tribulation didn't really, I don't know, I don't know what to do with that 7-year reference, and if in fact that we are looking at a 70th week of Daniel scenario where the tribulation is 7 weeks long, then, it just seems to me to be a good match with the first trumpet. And the fact that it takes 7 years led me to believe that this happens before the tribulation period, and in fact the first trumpet is what kicks off the 7-year tribulation period.
Yeah, I think it's a likely scenario. Well, I think we're out of time.
I think we are too. But I got one more quick comment on that.
Yeah, go for it, man.
I think most people are in agreement that Yeshua is coming back on the Feast of Trumpets. And so if that's true, then you have 7 Feasts of Trumpets leading up to the last one. You see what I'm saying? So
yes,
it's like, here's the first Feast of Trumpets. Boom! Coming out with a bang. And we got 6 more Feasts of Trumpets leading up to his final Feast of Trumpets when he comes back. So I always found that kind of an interesting idea too. And then where Paul says at the last trump, for the trump shall sound. I mean, what other references do we have for? I mean, we have the 2 silver trumpets, which are interesting, where the 2 witnesses have, the silver trumpets is a very interesting discussion. But then we also have the trumpets where they blow like 100 trumpets or something like that in the Feast of Trumpets, and we have these very specific trumpets of judgment. So, I mean, I see it all lining up, very well in that regard.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, and I don't know that I can add any more at this point.
All
So
right.
I think when we get into verse 8, we'll have some pretty interesting things to talk about, but that will have to wait until next time. So again, everyone, stay in the Word, stay in the quest for truth. The Bible has the answers. Don't trust us. Check it out for yourself. Be the Berean. Go and read the Word. See what the Word says. Do take it literally. That's our one exhortation to you, but take the word literally and apply it, discover it, study it, and boy, it sure is exciting, and it has just amazing answers.
Hmm.
Well, until next time, we thank you for turning into Quest for Truth.